Are you faced with leading an EMV migration project? Do you even know where to start? Are you bewildered about all of the things you will need to do in order to get through your project? Whether you are an acquirer, an issuer, a network, or a processor, you are facing a huge project. In this presentation, we will review some general guidelines that are relevant to anyone who is preparing to start an EMV migration project. In subsequent presentations, we will look at tasks that are specific to acquirers and issuers. If you have not already seen Part 1 and Part 2 of our EMV presentations, I highly recommend viewing those before viewing this presentation so you will understand the concepts and terminology used here. All project managers have found themselves in the following situation. You're assigned a project you know nothing about, and you're asked to give an estimate for the time and cost for that project. You pull some number out of the air, or maybe you even base it on some preliminary estimates from your team, but you don't have nearly enough information to provide a realistic number. Somebody takes your rough estimate and runs with it, and before you know it, that number or date seems to be cast in stone. It never seems to go away, even when a more informed estimate or even the project schedule is published later. It's almost impossible to estimate how long an EMV migration project will take or how much it will cost without doing a lot of upfront analysis. An EMV project could actually be called a program because it truly has enterprise-wide impacts. Plus, it impacts the end user experience. Business decisions impact technical implementation and vice versa. You have to balance all of the interesting possibilities of EMV and preparing for the future of payments against overspending and over-engineering. If you were around for the Y2K project and you thought that was big, well, you were right, it was big, but it wasn't nearly as big as an EMV migration project. One of the goals for Y2K was to make the transition to the year 2000 transparent to customers. No change to their behavior, nothing new, nothing bad happening. Well, with EMV, they will see a change, and you have to prepare them for it. One of the most important things you should do right up front is assign a high-level executive sponsor or a project champion. This person will help define and enforce the priority of the EMV project across all functional areas. Because of the enterprise-wide impact of an EMV migration project, it's vital that the priority of this project is clear to all of the groups that are involved in the project. The project sponsor can serve as your escalation point and can arbitrate in the event of conflicting priorities or resources between groups. Many large organizations find that they need two executive sponsors, one representing the business interests and one representing the technical side of the house. At a very high level in your organization, you need to define your program drivers. Why are you doing this project? Is your goal just to comply with mandates and avoid liability shifts? Or will you use this project to take advantage of the technology and lay the foundation for future projects? There is no wrong answer here. The answer that is right for you may be different than the answer for the organization across the street, but your answer will influence the scope of your project and its timeline. Define your business objectives. Exactly what do you need to accomplish with this project? Are you issuing chip cards? Are you upgrading or replacing terminals to support chip transactions? Are you upgrading your internal infrastructure? Perform a high-level risk assessment. What are some of the risks of doing this project? What other projects in the pipeline may need to be delayed because of the EMV project? What might happen during your project that could put your goals in jeopardy? If one of these events were to occur, what could you do to mitigate the impact? At this very early stage of the project, your risk management assessment will be at a very high level. You will be able to refine it later as you begin to dig down into the details of the project. You've heard the carpenter's adage, measure twice, cut once. That is very appropriate for this project. The more time you invest in analysis and planning, the smoother your project will go. Most organizations will have to build a business case for EMV due to the high cost and impact of the project. It's hard to see any revenue, much less a profit, from this project, and most companies would not voluntarily undertake a project of this magnitude without a significant return on investment. It's hard for an issuer to quantify the anticipated reduction in fraud, although you can cite statistics from other countries. It's hard for an acquirer to estimate the amount of fraud losses they will avoid by migrating to EMV. So, it is very difficult to make a compelling business case, even with the mandates, liability shifts, and waivers announced by the global payment networks. Due to the cost and resource requirements, this project typically has to be approved at a very high level of the organization, so that takes a lot of preparation and it takes a lot of time. Instead of trying to promote this as a revenue-generating project, focus on the points shown here. You should, of course, cite the announcements by the global payment networks and identify how they impact your organization. If you are an issuer, find out if you have cardholders that travel internationally. Obtain information about challenges those customers may have had using their magnetic stripe cards abroad. Have you lost any customers as a result? Look at statistics related to counterfeit card fraud and estimate how much of this type of fraud might be reduced by migrating to EMV based on what other countries have seen. If you are an acquirer, what percentage of transactions you acquire are performed by foreign cards? Investigate the average cost of a skimming incident and determine the potential impact to your organization, especially after the liability shift. Take a look at your plans for mobile banking and other emerging technologies and how the dynamic authentication offered by EMV is the foundation for many projects you may be considering for the future. Is it important for your organization to be seen as a market leader? Are you willing to accept the risk of being one of the last to migrate to EMV? Those who wait will very likely become special targets for criminals as they focus their efforts on those who have not migrated to EMV. Even though it may not be possible to quantify the benefits of migrating to EMV as a defensive move, it's an important consideration. You will need a really strong overall project manager. The project manager will need to work with and coordinate the activities of multiple external entities, as well as many functional areas within your organization. They must be able to communicate with external and internal groups. The project manager must clearly define the functional areas, responsibilities, and skill sets needed for the project. Most large organizations find that they need a central program office with one lead project manager and multiple subordinate project managers, each coordinating and managing various sections of the project or various groups. You will rely on strong technical leads in key areas such as development and QA. The project managers will build the project plan and manage to it. They must try very hard to control scope creep. Don't hesitate to enlist the services of an EMV subject matter expert. Someone who has been through this type of project before can help you make informed decisions throughout your project. Acquirers will be working with hardware vendors. You may be liaising with merchants and processors. Issuers will be working with a chip card provider and personalization bureau. Everyone who connects to a global payment network or regional network will need to have the most current specifications from those networks and understand the certification requirements for the networks. You will need testing tools, including test cards. There's an impact to development for online and back-office application software and possibly to current processes and practices. Consider the impact to branches or other subsidiaries and to those who interact with customers. QA and certification is vital. You will have impacts to documentation, training, and marketing. You will need to plan for production implementation and production support. What we have seen in EMV projects in the UK and in Canada is that approximately half of the time you will need for your project should be spent in upfront analysis and planning. If you do a good job in these stages, the subsequent implementation phases should go well. You really need to understand what your external partners are doing. This includes international and domestic, shared and proprietary global and regional networks. When are the various networks migrating to EMV? Do you have their updated specifications? What are their certification requirements? What about your technology partners? Can the hardware vendors provide the necessary parts, software, and services when you need them? Does your card provider have experience with EMV, or do you need to find a different provider? Can your card provider get cards to you when you need them? Internally, you'll have to assess the impact of this project on just about every system you have. The changes you make for this project are likely to impact many current and future projects. The EMV Migration Forum's EMV Connection website has a good graphic showing all of the parties that may be impacted by this project. Access their interactive presentation using the link shown here. When seeking budget approval, it helps to understand your internal processes and who are all the players. It's also a good idea to look at your project long term. What will you need to do to support EMV over the next 3 to 5 years, not just this year and next year? For example, if you are an issuer, eventually you will probably want to issue dual interface cards. So, do you start with those, or do you start with contact-only cards and reissue later? Lay out your best options and recommendations in your business case. Ask for everything you could possibly need in your first request. You may not get everything, but then if you have to go back later, it won't be a surprise to those who must approve your requests. Gather the information, present your business case, and wait for budget approval. Because of the cost of this project, this step can take a long time. As you begin your project, decide how you will relay basic information to your team. How is time accounting handled? How will team communication be handled? You will also need to get frequent updates from your team. You will probably be faced with multiple layers of meetings. There may be short daily status meetings between the members of a single team, for example, development. There will probably be weekly meetings between each project manager and the teams they are managing. There will probably be weekly meetings between the project managers and the program office. And you may be required to meet with the company executives on a monthly basis to assure them that the project is moving forward as expected. Send out meeting invites to make sure they get on everyone's calendar. Make sure you define the change management process the team will follow for this project. You will need to understand the current contractual requirements and service level agreements that are in place with your vendors and your customers. How might those change with EMV? Hold a project kickoff meeting with everyone involved in the project. Get everyone on the same playing field. Help them understand the goals of the project and every group's role in the project. Set expectations. Explain the deliverables and the timelines. Explain how time accounting, change management, status meetings, and similar items are to be handled. Next, each group must determine what they need to do in order to make the project succeed. What are their key deliverables and tasks? Unless the team members have a basic understanding of EMV, it will be very difficult for them to determine the tasks and the time required for their part in the project. But they must provide this information to the project manager, even if it is initially at a very high level. So, EMV training is absolutely essential. Otherwise, the team is just guessing, and your project schedule will be based on those guesses. The project manager will then begin to develop the project schedule. Don't forget to include holidays, vacations, maternity or paternity leave, and so forth. Allow for unexpected absences. Don't schedule tasks so tightly that you cannot handle any delays. Now you should have enough information to go back to your risk mitigation and expand on what you have already started there. Add as much detail as you can. This is an area you will continually revisit during your project as new challenges come to light. Some early key deliverables in your project will probably include business requirements, functional requirements, and functional specifications. Even if your teams don't believe in much documentation, do not skip these steps. With so many people involved in this project, it is very helpful to have some documentation to fall back on. There are very likely to be misunderstandings along the way about exactly what is supposed to be delivered. If you have a requirements document that all groups have signed off on, it is hard for someone to dispute that later. Be specific about what you are delivering. Clearly defining project deliverables will help you reduce scope creep. If you are affiliated with one of the global payment networks, that is MasterCard, Visa, American Express, or Discover, you will need to obtain the latest specifications, implementation guides, and other documentation from the network. Whether you are an issuer, an acquirer, or both, you will need to understand the requirements of the various networks. Contact your regional representative or account manager to let them know your plans. You may be required to attend workshops or complete a workbook or a charter. You will have to agree on any services you require, such as on behalf of services. You will need to schedule any activities such as terminal or card certification. Hopefully you have already certified your connections with the global payment networks and you are now ready to support EMV data in online transactions to and from those networks. This is an important first step so that when an acquirer is ready to move an EMV certified terminal into production, your interfaces can handle the new EMV data. Here are the high-level phases that were most likely part of your EMV network validation project. This presentation assumes that you have already completed this project. Once your connections to the global payment networks have been certified for EMV, acquirers can begin to upgrade or replace terminals and certify those terminals with the global payment networks before moving them into production. Issuers will need to define the parameters for their chip cards and work with their card provider and card personalization bureau to produce the cards. This slide shows the high-level phases for an acquirer EMV project. Some of the phases shown here can actually be done in parallel. Phases that are specific to acquirers are shown in green. We will look at these steps in more detail in a separate presentation. This slide shows some of the high-level phases for an issuer EMV project. Some of these phases can be done in parallel. Phases that are specific to issuers are shown in purple. Because there is a lot more involved in an issuer project than we can show here, we will look at an issuer project in more detail in a separate presentation. Let's take a closer look at some of the project phases that are common to all stakeholders. You will need to look at your online transaction processing software to make sure it supports EMV. If you purchase your software from a vendor, how current is that version? Does your version of the software support EMV? If not, you will need to work with your vendor to get an updated version of the software. If you have highly customized the software, you will need to look closely at your customizations and decide what has to be merged into any later versions of the software. If you developed your software in-house, you will need to update it to support EMV. This could be a huge effort. In addition to reviewing your online transaction processing software, don't forget other systems such as batch, reporting, and back office systems. If you are a processor and today you offer stand-in services for your customers, you will need to determine what EMV-related services you will perform for them and how to modify your software to do that. Testing is probably the most important phase of your project. You must do thorough regression testing because you must still support magnetic stripe transactions. You will need to test every possible combination of technology: magnetic stripe card at EMV-enabled terminal, chip card at magnetic stripe terminal, and so forth. If you are supporting both contact and contactless interfaces, you must test each combination for each of those interfaces. QA must be done prior to formal certification with the global payment networks because you need to certify exactly what you put into production. Formal certifications with the global payment networks are expensive and time-consuming. You want to make sure you can pass these certifications on the first attempt. So, before you attempt formal certifications of cards or terminals, you will want to do a lot of pre-certification testing. You will need to make sure you have the right tools to do this. Make sure you understand the formal certification process for each of the networks you are affiliated with. This includes not only the global payment networks, but any regional or national networks as well. You will have internal and external documentation that needs to be updated. Internal documentation might include guides for customer service representatives. External documentation might include statement inserts or other collateral that goes to cardholders. If you exchange data files with your business partners, see if those need to be updated to support EMV. Decide how you want to market EMV to your partners, customers, and cardholders. Naturally, you will want to portray this big change in a positive way. You will want to promote global interoperability as well as increased security aspects of this new technology. Once the project team has been through this project, they will be very knowledgeable about EMV. This knowledge must be transferred to those who will be supporting the project once it is in production. Banks and merchants will need to train customer-facing personnel so they can answer questions as customers begin to use their new chip cards. As a processor or a network, today you may offer stand-in authorization and PIN verification services for your customers, and you can still do that. With the introduction of EMV, you can consider additional services. Do you want to verify and generate cryptograms for your customer? If so, you will need the appropriate keys. Do you want to use EMV data in the request message when making an authorization decision? Will you perform EMV functions for your client and then send them the request as a magnetic stripe transaction, receive the magnetic stripe response, and send the response back to the acquirer as chip? Sometimes this is called message translation. You could potentially generate issuer scripts for your customers. You'll need the appropriate keys, and you'll need to work with your customer to understand the scenarios when they want scripts to be generated. You will need to spend a lot of time devising the best way to move all of your EMV-related changes into production and how to support them once they are in production. Now let's look at some general project guidelines. Migrating to EMV is a huge undertaking. It will take a lot of time, people, and money. When building your project plan, look for tasks that can be accomplished in parallel. Try to get the most experienced people on your project. This is not a project for newbies. The importance of good planning and documentation early in the project cannot be overemphasized. Redesign and re-engineering takes a lot of time. And if you issue chip cards that have errors in the personalization and you have to reissue those cards, that is very expensive and can adversely impact your customers. Despite your best plans, stuff will happen that you do not expect. Even with executive project sponsors, your EMV project will face conflicts with other projects for time, money, or people. You will never have enough people and other resources to do what you want as quickly as you want. It's hard to find people with EMV experience, so you'll have to invest in training. Rely on your strong team leaders. Do not think that throwing inexperienced personnel into your project will help you meet your dates. With a project this complex, with new technology, it's really hard to bring new people into the team midstream and expect them to be immediately productive. In fact, this can have a negative impact on the team since current team members will have to train the new people. Nobody can know everything. Don't be afraid to ask for information and for help. Expect challenges and surprises. By now, you are probably wondering, how long will my project take and how much will it cost? It's impossible to answer these questions until you do the necessary analysis and planning. So start now and good luck. We hope this presentation has been helpful. Paragon is a leading provider of e-payment simulation, configuration, and testing software solutions. We offer professional services including EMV training. We have over 590 customers in more than 85 countries. For more information about our products and services, contact us using one of the links shown here.